Ah. And no one's in channel?
Not yet. The notice goes out once I start the stream. So
No, I mean the chat channel.
Right, not yet, but the notice goes out once I start the stream. That's usually what draws people in.
Ah.
Let's do a quick audio check here. Did
No one's in channel?
Malcolm enjoy his experience with us, Miles? Notice goes out
I think
once
so.
I start the stream.
I think
No,
so.
I mean the chat
I sent him a link to the show
means
when
the
it got
chat
published,
channel.
but he hasn't
Not yet,
gotten
but
back to
the
me
notice
yet.
goes out once I start. All right.
Okay, so should we
he's
stop
very
and kill and
moment.
restart our
No, we're good.
Audacity? No,
We're
okay.
Now, we are started. Now, make a marker. And begin. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Geek Rant, episode 297. Give me liberty, or give me profit. Recorded August 26th. No, August 6th, 2017, and brought to you by Element Opie Productions. ElementOpie.com. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Drive Time Radio for Geeks, where you want it, when you want it. I am your host, Mark, the Sultan of the Soapbox Cockerel, and joining me this week, as always, are your two stalwart co-hosts, Seth, the Gooey Kid Anderson, and Miles, the Aussie Engineer Wakeham. Hello, gentlemen.
Greetings, everyone.
3 more episodes to 300.
You know, the reason that's exciting to me is because the 2 key on my keyboard doesn't work on the 10 keypad. So for these 97 episodes now, I've been hitting 2. Oh, it doesn't work. And then I go up and hit 2 up by the W, and then 9, 5, 9, 6, whatever. So that will be over, except, you know, once every 10 episodes. So I'll feel better about that.
Woohoo!
It's
So,
the
like,
oddest
what,
thing. I spilled water on my keyboard, and the only damage was the 2 key stopped working.
This day was prophesized.
And that happened like when we were in the 100s, like 195 or whatever. So literally 100 weeks now, I've been living with the broken keyboard. But you know, I can live with that. I'm such a tightwad. I can't even make myself spend.
Oh, you're not a tightwad anymore. You're just holding on to the dream.
I'm not.
Send us money, listeners. Send us money.
I'm a fat cat liberal now, am I, Seth?
I mean, we could go back to the previous shows where you've butchered tightwadedness and all of your open source credo. So,
well, that's. I'm still a tightwad for myself. I'm happy to spend your money. I just don't want to spend my own.
Okay.
I do want to say a thank you, and if I were any prepared at all to do this show, I'd actually have the name. But a listener recently in the last few weeks began donating a fairly significant regular amount. I'm not going to do any details. In fact, if you go to the page, you can see it for yourself. But it was, I always say pay for what you like. And this listener illustrated that he likes what we do. And I appreciate that very much. It's nice, in this time of everybody wants everything for free. It's nice when somebody, kicks a few bucks here and there. And anytime I see those Patreon pledges come in, it's not just the money. I mean, money is nice, but it's the stand of solidarity that I appreciate more than anything else. So thank you for that.
We gratefully accept the currency of Attaboy.
There you go. Yeah. And Bitcoin's fine too. Not taking Bitcoin Cash just yet. Actually, I don't know. I have just a Bitcoin service up on the website that immediately converts it to cash and sends it to me via PayPal. I don't even know if they do Bitcoin Cash or not. But if you want to throw money at me, my Bitcoin wallet is there on the website. Click the tip jar.
I was when I used to listen to this one Bitcoin podcast before they jacked their feet up. There was this plugin you could do for websites, and it was this service that you could pay if they accepted an altcoin. This service would take whatever altcoin you had and convert it to that. So it's like, if the cost was half an ether, then and all you had was Litecoin, it would tell you need, I don't even know the exchange rate. You need 7.38 Litecoin for this transaction. And so you would pay this service in Litecoin, and the person would get their thing in Ether. And I wish I could remember the name of it. I can't. So
taking a small percentage along the way, I'm sure.
Yeah, but it wasn't a lot. And Shapeshift .io, if I recall the website.
Yeah, Eric Voorhees project. I know that one well.
All right. I was listening to a Leo Laporte podcast this weekend, and I've been way behind. My work has been such that I haven't been able to listen to podcasts much lately. So this one may be weeks old. But he was commenting on somebody who was docked 2 weeks' pay for it was some foreign country thing, and that 2 weeks' pay was $8,500, so $17,000 a month. And Leo said, "Well, it's not a high-paying job." And I thought, that just shows how out of touch with reality Leo is. Most of the world would be crazy, insanely happy to make $204,000 a year, but Leo in his Northern California, reality distortion field, doesn't think $200,000 is a high-paying job.
Wow.
Yeah, I always wondered how I haven't watched him for a few months, but I did watch him when they were going through some recent studio move, and they went from this small little cute studio in Petaluma to this mega industrial park office thing with I'm thinking, who's funding this? This is like a couple of $1 million to build this thing. I have no idea how he's pulling it off.
And he doesn't even own the building. He leases it. So
yeah,
I was like, what? You're going to spend all that money on something you don't? Oh man, I couldn't believe it. So,
well, he charges the highest cost per thousand rate of any advertiser ever, and he gets advertisers. So clearly, he produces content that people want to pay for.
You know what's really amazing to me? I was just thinking about this today. It just seems to me, I mean, I don't know, I'm interested in your take on this, that the people maybe 10 years ago who used to be personal computer nerds, us geeks, and we used to argue about what operating system was the best and all that sort of stuff. Like we all went away or something because nobody cares about personal computers anymore. And I just put Leo Laporte in the category of the PC show podcasts of yesteryear. And I don't know if there's anything that's keeping up to date with what people really are into.
Well, that's the question: is what is it that people are really into? It's not PCs anymore. Even the diehards now, you have to make a special effort and spend more money and go out of your way to build your own rig anymore. It used to be the way to get the best rig and the way to do it for the least money was to do it yourself. So the tightwad ethos, the maker ethos, was let's learn about this sort of stuff and let's make sure that our buses are compatible and get the right RAM that goes in the right hard drive, and it became a thing. But now it is, you can buy a PC at Best Buy or CompUSA, they're not even around anymore, at Walmart for less than you can buy the components to build one as good as that. PCs have just become disposable things anymore, and not only
commodities.
But not only that, people aren't even using PCs as much as they used to. It's the tablet and even the mobile devices. So I think the market ran away from the enthusiasts rather than the other way around. And now there are people looking into mini PCs and 3D maker, 3D printers and that sort of stuff. But really, I think there's a whole bunch of people out there who are just looking for a niche to arise that just hasn't come up yet.
Yeah. I just remember the day when you used to go to those computer fairs where, it was kind of like somebody rented an old expo building somewhere and sold, vendor space. And you'd go there and all of these kind of small companies that were one step up from a home-based business would be there selling motherboards they brought in from Taiwan. And do you remember those days? They were kind of fun.
Yeah,
you never knew what you discovered.
It was Third Saturday in Dallas. They met under an overpass in downtown Dallas, and it was just an empty field. Nobody even owned it, or I guess it was publicly owned, but it was just a couple of acres of dirt. And people would pull their cars up and set up tents and stuff. And it started at like 1 a.m. If you waited till like 9, like a normal person, all the good deals would be gone. And so over time, it officially started at 9 a.m., but over time it gradually worked its way back to where if you wanted the good stuff, you had to get there at midnight or before. And I walked that row a few times and bought. Of course, there was this whole row of porn over there. That's always been available. But the motherboards and the games for cheap and all that sort of stuff. Where are those people now? Where is that market now? I don't know the answer to that.
Well,
Amazon, eBay.
yeah.
Now, I mean, you think about it. In the olden days, pre any of us, you couldn't just go out and buy a car and drive it somewhere. One, there were no roads. And two, you either had to be a mechanic or you had to have a mechanic ride with you because your car would break down every 5 or 10 minutes or whatever. But now you don't have to. The only thing you don't even really have to know what a car looks like to be able to get into one and drive it. And used to PCs, even as late as the early 2000s were a geek realm. You had to be interested, you had to be a hobbyist, a tinker, entrepreneur type person. And now, PCs are so cheap, I can't spend 3 hours working on a PC to save the OS because, whatever, because you can go out and I'll buy a brand new computer for 3 hours of what it would cost me to work on it, with that level of skill. So it's become, it's a commodity. They're almost irrelevant these days. They're so widely available and so cheap.
And everything around it is starting to become irrelevant's a good word. I'm going to be cautious about saying that Leo Laporte is irrelevant, but at the same time, I just don't have the draw to go and listen to his podcasts and watch his channels and all of that. It's like I don't even have with things like Cody boxes. I did install the Twit TV app on there so I could watch his stuff on the Cody box. But I don't use it. I end up spending all my time watching YouTube. It's like if you want to really broadcast to the world now, you go on YouTube, become a YouTube star, and we don't all try to have to jump through a million technical hoops to do it. It's become so easy now. So I don't really know how relevant he is anymore, hence investing $1 million or whatever in a big studio and all that stuff seems a little naive to me. But
well, I don't know. He has a whole production company. He has really a podcasting network. What, a dozen shows or more?
More.
Covering, a lot more. There's the Security Now, Steve Gibson, freaking genius. The regular Twit. There's what, Apple Weekly, Android Weekly, Crap We'll Never Use Weekly, Windows Weekly. Bottom Scraping, Tech Barrel Weekly, whatever. He'll get a show out on it. So yes, maybe the original, what Leo Laporte became famous for has kind of, that wave has crested and fallen, but he had the foresight to, while that wave was up, he jumped to the one behind it that was only just this little swell. And now he's ridden that wave. And so he seems to have the savvy to, not be caught in what got him there. He's like, I don't care who brought me. I care who's about to show up to the dance so I can stay. And, in a way, that's something that a lot of the diehard enthusiast of whatever genre lack. They're like, I love my Amiga and it will be Amiga forever. And, great. But, you're now isolated to some random corner of the interwebs.
Yeah, I'll just say I would love to be as irrelevant as Leo Laporte is today.
Yeah, and then I was talking about PCs, not him.
Yeah.
So, and irrelevant was probably a strong word, but words are failing me now.
Anyway, that was an interesting discussion. I didn't mean to go down that road, but it is indicative of a changing thing. The top 20 or so podcasts in the world right now are not technical. Some of them are, but they're not. In the early days, they were all technical. But now it's things like This American Life and Mike Rose, The Way I Heard It. And I just looked at this list just recently, the top 20. But of the top 20, maybe 2 were technical. And not really technical, not speeds and feeds technical, but,
we're technical.
Yeah, technical as in the zeitgeist of the geek. But podcasting is not the geek realm anymore. It isn't. And, my hope in 2008 or whatever was to get in on a nascent market and ride that tide up What happened was, I got drowned, and the tide has risen, and I'm irrelevant. I'm okay with that. I'm not having a pity party or anything. Don't misunderstand me. I just understand now that this kind of show that we do here is never going to have an audience of more than a few thousand people. I don't know why, honestly. I don't know what the other people have that we don't. But whatever it is, we don't have it. If we had it, we would have risen by now.
But we have the best few thousand people.
One of us needs to become famous at something, and then all of a sudden people will listen to our podcast. So send us your nominations. Feedback. What is our address? General address?
GeekRant at elementop.com.
GeekRant at elementop.com, and nominate who you want to have a sex tape.
Moving right along.
Or how much money will you pay us to not make a sex
there
tape?
You go.
Maybe
That's it.
Do better.
If you don't donate millions of dollars, I will make a tape of that. Funny. Just today, I was replacing a PC power supply, something I used to do literally dozens of times a week. The main family room PC, it's a shame to even call it that. I think I bought that in like 2004. It's that old. And it's still kicking along. It's got Windows Vista on it. It's still kicking along, but it's been through like 3 hard drives, and this is the second power supply. But I can't justify for $15 for a new power supply, or $400 for a middling computer, $900 to $1,100 for a good one, for something that we just watch YouTube videos on and type Word documents on. I just can't justify that expense. So today I bought the replacement power supply 14 months ago or so, and today I finally got around to putting it in, and it took me 10 minutes, and I thought 10 minutes worth of work, but 14 months to get around to do that work. But my skills have atrophied. It took me I said 10 minutes. It was really about half an hour from start to finish to put that thing in. It really should have been about 4 minutes. But I literally was looking at this Molex connector going, does that go pin side up, or which the clip goes on? What? I really should have looked at that before I took it off. I don't remember how. And I thought, that's just not my life anymore. Yeah, I'm not the tightwad tech anymore. I don't sit around soldering components anymore. So maybe the reason that I'm no longer listening to Leo and his stuff is that I'm not in that world anymore. Anyway, there was a point somewhere, but I've lost it. So Seth, Atomic Blonde, I know nothing about this. I didn't even know Atomic Blonde was a thing. So you're going to have to fill me in.
Okay. I'm surprised you haven't seen previews, either at other movies you've seen or on Netflix or whatever. Charlize Theron is a secret agent. This is set at the end of the Cold War, late, right at the time the Berlin Wall fell. So I believe that was 89-ish, whenever that. Anyway, yes. I was a kid. I didn't care. So she's like this secret agent, trying to get this list to whatever. And there were a couple of fight scenes that were, to me, of the quality of the third Jason Bourne movie in the bathroom. That's how good the fight scenes were. But there wasn't enough of a movie around those fight scenes. So they're like, show Charlize Theron's boobs. And, okay, show her boobs again. And, show her boobs with somebody else's boobs. And, so it wasn't a good movie. There were some, like I say, some of the fight scenes were incredible. The plot, it just seems like they did not tell a good movie. Now, it's based on some graphic novels I had never heard of, which I'm not really into graphic novels or comics much anymore. So I don't know if the source material was weak or if people who weren't fans tried to make a movie out of the source material. It didn't come. I wasn't like, plot twist. Oh, okay. I don't care. I'm not emotionally involved in so it didn't do it for me. But anyway, Atomic Blonde, more TNA than I was expecting. But there's some action, there's some death, violence, gore, but that part moves the story along. The TNA, there's like one part where you could say, okay, in this aspect I can see it, but otherwise it was just throw it in there to cover up a weak story.
So wait for DVD release.
I guess, yeah. Maybe a Netflix it and Netflix and forget, but I wouldn't pay money to see it. I'm kind of bummed I did, but I saw it at a cheap theater, so it didn't cost me a lot.
It's got 75% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is actually a pretty high score. 63% on Metacritic. So it's a middling movie at best, even by the critics. I seriously, I'm looking at it up now. I haven't seen a commercial for this movie. Now, I don't watch a lot of real television, so that might be why. I haven't seen previews or posters anywhere. I've never seen the comic book. This is like, I've been dropped from another planet. I do know who Charlize Theron is, but so far that's the only name you've mentioned that I know anything about.
The trailers look like a cross between James Bond and Sin City. And unfortunately, like happens so often today, the trailers just did a very poor job of capturing the zeitgeist of the movie. And, there were some really good scenes that weren't in the trailers, but it wasn't a good movie. Some parts of it were great, but as a movie, it flopped.
Yeah.
To me.
You mentioned your thing there. Your mention of nudity is my biggest complaint. I'm an adult. I don't mind human bodies, male or female, being naked on screen. But if it's just there to cover up a weakness, that's a problem. And I do see that a lot. It's like, and Blood is the same way. We have a weak plot. We have a weak main character. We can't tell a story, so let's show guts. Or let's show boobs. And so when I use or sometimes language is the same way. It's like we can't write, so let's just throw the F-bomb out there. We don't know. There surely is a good adjective here, but I can't think of it, and I'm too lazy, so I'm just going to say effing. That's not even an adjective, right? But so when I talk about gratuitous violence or gratuitous nudity or gratuitous language, it's not just because it offends my right-wing conservative Christian sensibilities. It offends my sensibilities as a viewer of quality media. And you really put it very well there. It doesn't advance the story. It just covers up a weakness. I like that. Yeah. I'll use that.
Yeah, like I say, there was one part where I say, okay, that fits in the story. You could have done it without, but I don't have a problem with it there. And of course, Charlize is still hot, however old she is. She's like, they keep her in Tupperware or something between movies because she doesn't seem to age. So she's hot, and I got to see her boobs. But, as far as a movie, it could have been awesome in a great movie. So,
and she can act. I mean, maybe this was a role that was beneath her.
I mean, I wouldn't say anything bad about her acting. It just the movie didn't do it for me. So, I don't know.
My wife and I watched on Netflix or a Netflix DVD actually the second Jack Reacher. Jason Bourne, Jack Reacher. It's all the same character. Right. The second Jack Reacher movie, Never Going Back, I think it was. My wife has a thing for Tom Cruise, so she will watch him read the phone book. And so that movie was for her. But
right.
I like watching stuff blow up, so there was some for me. And I felt the whole time, all the way through from beginning to middle to end, the whole time I was like, I don't regret watching this. That's like the best I could say about it. I don't regret watching it. It wasn't great. It was predictable. Not at any point was there, oh, I didn't see that coming. No, never happened. The actresses, the Kobe Smulders, I think it is. She's in the MC universe. She's
the agent chick.
Her name, yeah. She's Fury's right hand woman.
Right.
She was on How I Met Your Mother. And so she's a well-known actress, 10 years or so was the How I Met Your Mother, and then she's been in several movies. And yet on the cover of the film, all you get is a 3/4 profile and a swish of her long hair flying. I didn't even know the actress was in the movie. From looking at the movie poster, it's Tom Cruise's face, an explosion in the background, and her hair. And talk about a wasted character. It just goes to show, I guess, the power of Tom Cruise. But anyway, all the way through the movie, it was fine. When it was over, it was fine. It's like on a scale of 1 to 10, it's a 6. It's fine. I don't regret having watched it. Don't recommend it. Honestly, can't remember it. I just watched it last night. Can't tell you what happened in it.
I kind of, if I remember correctly, I enjoyed that one more than I did the first one. And apparently there's a whole series of books. I think the books would be pretty cool. But
the books I've heard are excellent. But yeah.
I'm reading my zombie apocalypse series, and I've got, let me see, I'm only on book 9, so I think I got another year left on my 1 book a month plan before I catch up with them. So,
all right, so there's my media for the night. And Miles, you have somewhere between the two. You have explosions and computers.
Oh yeah, not anything entertaining. I made the mistake of going on Craigslist to find a electrical contractor to bring out to my house to install. I had this stupid idea in my head that I wanted to replace the receptacles in a number of outlets in my house with those that have those USB chargers in them.
Oh, yeah.
You've seen those?
I've got
things
a couple of those.
Got a couple of those. Well, I don't like dealing with mains voltage, so rather than me try and do it and screw something up, I decided to find somebody who could do it. And all of my maintenance guys that we use for our rental properties, you know, they're all busy. It's summer and it's too hot and they don't want to work. So whatever. So I went to Craigslist to find some journeyman electrical guy to come out to the house. And he did, and he installed them. And of course, he had to turn all of the power switches off on the circuit board before he did anything, which of course I wanted him to do that. And I went out with him to show him the board, and I said, listen, whatever you do, don't touch that circuit. That's the circuit to my office with all my computers and servers in it. And, you know, they're on UPSs and everything, but still, I don't need to be dealing with rebooting everything because you just did this thing. And so he goes, yep, okay, not a problem. Sure, no problem. So I go back to my office to work while he's doing all of this thing. And next thing you know, the whole room's black and everything's off. And I'm like, oh, no. And so I go out there, like, what did you do? Well, I didn't turn the one you pointed at, and he's pointing at the wrong one. I'm like, you idiot. Anyway, I'm thinking, okay, fine. Look, I'll recover. I'll turn everything back on, right? Well, everything doesn't come back on when you do those abrupt power disconnects, particularly to the old vintage computers I've got, which have, you know, got old power supplies, capacitors or whatever. So now I'm going to spend the next 2 weeks cleaning up one by one every machine that just blew up as a result of this guy. So public service announcement, don't go to Craigslist and find a journeyman electrician if you value anything in your house.
Or maybe an even simpler pro tip, put a piece of tape over the one that he shouldn't move.
Oh, yeah. Oh, man. Anyway, that was it.
I have 2 of those outlets that I picked up on a site called AmazonReviewTrader.com. It's no longer a thing. But you could get free or discounted stuff by leaving an honest Amazon review, which I did. And these were great. But they're very difficult to install because they're so thick. They fill the entire electrical box. And in both cases, I've done lots of, electrical work, complete with, I've wired entire buildings from the ground up. But putting these 2 things in was one of the hardest things I've ever done because I ended up having to structurally alter the box that they were in because they were so thick. So just consider that in the future. Did your electrician have that issue?
Yeah. Well, we did get it in. He wasn't really good on the smarts, but he was really good on the brute force side of things.
Yes.
They also they make these things that fit between your plug and the outlet that it's about the size of a credit card, and then once you get outside the plug, it fans up where you can stick a USB cable in it for people who say, I would like to be able to charge at the wall, without having a bunch of power strips everywhere. You can just, like I say, it's about the thickness of a credit card at the plug, and so the plug holds it against the wall, and then it uses the teeth, or for lack of a better word, the teeth of the plugs to get its power to power the USB stuff. So
yeah, so I will do a plug for something I haven't used, but I've seen them, and they look like the perfect solution, but they're just a little too pricey for me right now. They're called Snap Power. You can go to snappower.com, and it's a faceplate that fits over your existing outlet and there's two little metal contacts in the faceplate that that power either a USB charger or a 3 LED set of nightlights.
Huh.
And it's really the simplest. If you don't have to replace any of your sockets, all your existing outlets. You don't have to do anything like that. Don't even have to turn the power off. You just unscrew the faceplate and screw the new faceplate on. Done. And it really looks like the way I would go if I weren't such a tightwad. But Seth says I'm not, so apparently I should just go ahead and load up on them. But it's I think they're about $10 a piece. I'm trying to find them now on our website. When they don't list the price on the website, that's a bad thing. But the last time I checked, I think it was a 3-pack for $30, which is not terrible. It's just
That's not bad.
a little more than I'm willing to pay. When you can get just a regular charger for $2.
Holy schmoly.
Because not only once you do that, you still got to have the cable and all that. So,
No. A 3-pack is apparently $54.
Oh, okay. So even more than I remembered.
A single is $20. 2-pack is, you can buy 10 for $160. So there you go. That's your best bet.
Okay.
So,
and that's not an unreasonable investment. We've all got 10 outlets in the living rooms and the bedrooms and the kitchens, and at $16 an outlet, that's not a terrible idea. But then you still have to have a USB cable in every place unless you're going to carry one with you. So it's not the one-shot fix everything solution, but it would certainly be probably less expensive and less difficulty than you went through. I wish I'd told you about this a couple of weeks ago, Miles.
Yeah. Ah, well, you live and learn.
All right, there's a little bonus tip for today. So now we're going to move on to some listener feedback, which is also the topic of the show this week. It's from David, and it's a very long email that we thought deserved an entire show. So here we go. David says, sorry in advance for this long, rambling post. It was just something that was keeping me up late one night, and I need to get it down. I've sent it to you after some editing, but like I said, it still rambles on a bit. Thankfully, it's somewhat related to the net neutrality hubbub that's currently popular in the U.S. right now. But anyway, I'm going to call this David's tirade. It seems to me that everyone on the show is fairly conservative, maybe libertarian, and all of you have a fondness for open source. So I pose this question. Can libertarians, or conservatives, truly embrace open source as a value? On the surface, I suppose it makes sense. It's a free or cheap product featuring a pay-what-you-want model, so it's fiscally conservative. There also isn't any real centralized force behind it, at first glance anyway, so that fits with the small government mantra of conservatives and libertarians. But the entire open source philosophy is about community. You take and you give something in return. If you fork a project, you must abide by the rules of the license code you forked from. Now this depends on the license, but the most common is the GNU public license, the GPL, which is very much all about community. So doesn't it mean that open source is more communistic or socialistic? Now don't get me wrong, communism and socialism by themselves are not inherently bad systems. I think everybody agrees on this. Every system of government or ruling, including capitalism, always breaks down because of human greed, which is the main reason why modern Americans shy away from the two types of government, and also the Cold War helped. But when conservatives and libertarians are far more capitalistic, which is all about living based upon the merits of your work, does this contradict the open source mindset? The users are able to leech off of the hard work of developers who don't get paid unless the rare person donates money. Bill Gates once wrote a letter about open source hobbyists and raised this exact question. Quote, if you're creating computer programs for free, how will you make money? Even today, a lot of open source developers struggle with this problem. Some projects like Ardour have the code available and you can build the program for free if you like. But if you want the executable binaries, you have to pay a small amount of money. Other projects like Elementary OS have a pay-what-you-want model, where they ask for a donation toward the project, but you can set it to zero. Of course, the most common way is through donations or Patreon, but it can be difficult to get people to do one or the other. By the way, this is the perfect time to plug elementop.com/Patreon. I don't expect all of these questions to be answered in a single show, but I do think it's interesting brain fodder. As someone who is starting to take privacy much more seriously due to some recent happenings, mostly with Microsoft, I sometimes feel like my governmental beliefs as a libertarian counteract my software beliefs. Hopefully this fuels at least one episode of interesting discussion from you three. Before I leave, I want to say that I went and bought a System 76 laptop, the Gazelle, and I'm really enjoying it. I've actually found that it's about the same price as other laptops with similar specifications. So either price has gone down a lot in recent years or other manufacturers are getting more expensive. I'm not sure which. Either way, keep up the great show, David. So there you go. Can you be both a capitalist and an open source enthusiast? And I'll admit, we've talked about this in roundabout ways for, the last 5 years. There is some tension there. The guy, one of my favorite mantras is programmers got to eat. And if you want their stuff for free, they're going to either go do something else where they can make money and stop programming, or they're going to take a professional programming job and their code won't be available anymore. I've seen lots of open source projects, things I really loved, go away because the developer couldn't make a living and couldn't devote the time that he needed to the free thing. So I get that, the capitalistic mindset. You can't live on love. You got to have actual cold hard cash to feed a family and take care of yourself. But at the same time, I don't think that commercial software anywhere in the world, I don't think the commercial offering is always the best offering. Many times the open source offering is the better one because that's when you get the person's passion. They go to a dead-end job they hate, they come home and do what they love, and you get the product of what they love. So I like that about open source. But David asks an interesting question. If we could fast forward 25 years, can both coexist? Guys, what do you think?
Go ahead, Miles. You go first.
All right. So I have a lot of experience in this because I've had to live through this exact problem. So the answer is yes, absolutely they can, and they can live together very comfortably, but not necessarily for all the reasons that most people think. So I'll give some context behind that. A while back, and this is going back to about 2003, I was finishing a long-standing, I wouldn't call it a career, but a long-standing level of being a senior developer in a very proprietary software programming language from France called Fourth Dimension. And I had developed in this thing for nearly 20 years. It was a Macintosh database product that came out in the mid-'80s, and I'm showing my age here, but I was one of the early adopters, and I became one of the experts in it. And I rode that train for a long time, but all through it, the company was very all about money. I mean, and that's okay. Everybody in that back in those days was selling their time for a premium. So, there was plenty of money sloshing around to write, database applications and so on for customers. The problem was I didn't want to write one-to-one applications for customers. I wanted to write an application and sell it openly. And back in the 90s and the early 2000s, you could do that. You could put an application out on the internet. People could download it and pay, with their credit card and get a license and use it. And the problem with that particular product was that it had a server component when you had multiple users running it. And the server component you had to buy from 4D, the company that sold it. Very, very expensive. It meant that their costs, when I say very expensive, I'm talking thousands of dollars. So their costs had to be incorporated into my costs, passed on to the customer. Therefore, my software had to be thousands and thousands plus thousands and thousands. And in the end, I was very expensive. But I lived in that world because at the time I had a particular offering that nobody else had. So I was happy enough to do it. Well, I realized as time went on, this company was not really investing its profits back into its product in a way that was going to help me. They were going off on other tangents that didn't have any relevance to what I was doing. So I knew that my days in this world had to come to an end. And around about the early 2000s, I looked for ways to get out of this business. And the one thing I was looking for was how do I get out of this business and not be in a situation where I'm tethered to another manufacturer and spending an enormous amount of money for their product. And at this point in time, the biggest issue was the database. Now, if you go back in time here, software developers probably know all this stuff anyway. This was when MySQL came out. This is when PostgreSQL came out. And there were a lot of products vying for the best database of choice. What I wanted was a product that I could bundle with my software, distribute it at a minimal cost to my end users to reduce my cost of the product down so the customers could buy more volume and that, it would all work. I ended up choosing a product back in its very early days called Firebird. And what Firebird was an open source version of the old product from a company called Borland back in the day called Interbase. They'd actually bought it. And what had happened is that these guys had kind of mismanaged Interbase. And somebody at some point around about 1999, there was all this, it was really cool to be an open source company back then. So they had decided that they weren't selling enough of this thing, so they would open source it. So they released the code out to the world, and a whole bunch of people from all over the world picked it up, forked it into this thing called Firebird. And to this day, I love Firebird as a SQL database. It's awesome. And it's 100% free. So all of a sudden, I go from a company who's been spending thousands and thousands of dollars with this French mob to buy their software, their OEM license, to I don't have to pay anything. And all of a sudden, my prices dropped, my product quality went up, I could use other platforms, I could do things I couldn't have done before. And in the end, I felt really good, and I was making good money. And then I was faced with the quandary. How is this ever going to continue? How are these guys ever going to continue this project? They had once a year, they all got together somewhere in Prague and had a little, expo thing for themselves. And I realized it was a very small community. There were like 50 or 100 people in it. It was not big. How do I help this stay alive? So what I did was I went on their website, and they had this thing where you could sign up as a founding partner. And you could give them a swag of money, and they'd recognize you as being, on their team. And I wasn't going to write their code. I hadn't got time for that. I wasn't going to write their documentation or translate something into English or whatever. But I was really leveraging their products so well that I ended up giving them $5,000 because that was nothing compared to what I was paying this French company for their software. And I was still selling, hundreds of licenses of this thing. And it helped them move ahead. It helped them get other developers. And in doing that, I started realizing where all these developers who were working on the project were coming from. They were all from Eastern Bloc European countries, or they were from Brazil, or they were from China or Malaysia. And the one thing they had in common was they didn't need money like I needed money. And I'm not saying that I need a lot of money. I'm just saying that in the United States, it's expensive to live. I mean, it costs you probably a year's salary to pay a month's rent compared to those guys. And when they don't need an enormous amount of money, they still have a lot of time on their hands and a lot of interest in pursuing their technologies. And that's where the open source market is flourishing. So in summary, if you say, can free market and open source live together? Absolutely it can. Free market can help fund open source. And if open source is done in economic regions that don't require a lot of money, this can work. And so, yeah.
Wouldn't you have to agree that this is the exception and not the rule? That this is a small case of everything going right and not the template for the way to make money and to make a living using open source?
You may be right. If that's the case, I got lucky on my first journey with this whole thing. I use Apache, I use PHP, I use a lot of open source, I use Linux, I use a lot of open source projects. Do I give back to them? Sometimes, not anywhere near as much as I did with this project, but
so a lot of the things that you just mentioned there, Apache, MySQL, these sort of things, they exist because a large entity is scratching their own itch. For example, StarOffice, which is now OpenOffice and has since forked to LibreOffice, that got its start of a German software company who was making a version of Microsoft Office or a competitor to Microsoft Office. Sun Microsystems was coming up on a system-wide site license upgrade, to Microsoft Office, and they found that it was cheaper to buy a software company than it was to purchase a single software. So they scratched their own itch. That's how that came to be. There were, Apache follows a similar story. It's huge because companies need it to be huge. Linux is huge because companies need it to be huge. So if you can, hitch your wagon to one of those infrastructure things, I think you're pretty safe. I think Linux is pretty safe for a while. Apache is pretty safe for a while. MySQL is pretty safe for a while. Although the NoSQL guys have been trying to, not NoSQL not being a thing, but a group of people have been trying to tackle that for a while. MongoDB, for example. But those are, again, the few monolithic examples that I don't think represent the true state of modern affairs. Seth, what do you think?
Okay, well, unfortunately, the true state of modern affairs is we have no way to know if open source and capitalism can coexist, because what runs rampant in America now has been so perverted by greed that there's really no capitalism left. Now it's a winner take all mentality, and we're going to kill anybody who gets close to us. So in capitalism, open source works great because you want to make a living and you want to make a profit, but you realize you live in a community, and your profits, you might get a bigger short-term profit by screwing all of the open source people you use their stuff for free, but you can have a long-term viable product if you take the time and invest in the open source projects as if you were buying your software from closed source groups, in much the same way that you can slash and burn agriculture and farm for a few years, or you can learn to live with your environment, and you could live in, around for eternity. Or you can destroy your land and, go destroy other land to get fertilizer for your land to go good, then go destroy other land to fix that land. Or, you can crop rotate and don't try to grow 1,000 acres of cotton every year for 100 years running. So capitalism is fine, and it allows open source to flourish, but it only works if the people in charge of the capitalism have morals. And that's something that unfortunately seems to be lacking. And for proof, I just say, have you looked at the news? So I think it can. Unfortunately, I think it's impossible to test.
So inherent, I want to take what you said and look at what David said. Inherent in your description there is capitalism has been supplanted, and there's a dearth of true capitalism in the world today. It seems to be also inherent in David's email that he equates liberty with anarchy. And that if we accept any rules, we're somehow foregoing our liberty. And there are those. Stallman would probably be the head of the line to agree with that. That any acceptance of rules of someone else is inherently giving up freedom. But I think you have to recognize that in the real world, not in the theoretical world, there is neither utopia nor dystopia. There's the real world somewhere in between, that capitalism will always devolve into greed at some point, and liberty will always devolve into anarchy at some point. And so you have to have restrictions and rules on both of those things. So really, maybe the modern existence of open source is that middle line walking between liberty and between greed and anarchy.
Well, anarchy is only without governance. That's all that it means. It just means that we don't have, a state over us telling us what we can and cannot do.
Say take governance and not think state of affairs, but in any open source community, there must be governance. There must be. Otherwise, it devolves into anarchy. And that's why, like I said earlier, Star Office, Open Office, LibreOffice, I didn't pick that accidentally. Those are cases of disagreements in governance, anarchy erupting, and then new governance being developed. and that is the history repeating itself. Or who was it? Somebody said history doesn't repeat, but it sure echoes. The echoes of history that we see in open source over and over is a group of people at some point taking their dolly and going home because they can't agree with the governance. I mean, what we were talking about earlier, Bitcoin Cash, SegWit, all that sort of stuff. It's the disagreements are very rarely technical and are governance related. And so the open source mindset, the freeness of things, the free as in and speech mantra has always been about being anti-governance. But you also can't get anything done without some form of governance. So aren't we both shooting ourselves in the foot either way?
I mean, yeah, because one of the reasons, the one reason that Linux doesn't dominate the end user experience is because everybody got mad and switched to, and we're going to make a new distro based on the kernel, and then everybody there got mad. We're going to make a new distro, and then we're going to make a new distro, and we're going to make a new distro. So you have 758 separate distros trying to reinvent the wheel. That if everybody would have stuck with the original one, you could have a polished, well-heeled operating system that the end user, non-technical person, that's why Apple survived their near-death experience. And that's how Microsoft was able to dominate the corporate environment. They produced something on the computer that you didn't have to be a computer expert to use. And Linux hasn't got to that point because everybody is squabbling over these issues rather than just picking one and running with it, or even just picking 2, 3, 4, 5 and running with it. Instead, instead of having 100 developers working on 10 projects, we have 100 developers working on 150 projects. And so they're not going anywhere like they should be. And you could argue that's pure open source at its best, no rules. I'm going to take the code and I'm going to go home and yay, freedom. But I can't use it because I'm not a freaking expert and I don't want to spend, 6 months learning to do something that you're going to be mad and go somewhere else and the people who are left aren't going to know. So can pure open source exist in today's world? No. But could people put some boundaries on open source and make it viable even in today's headhunter, winner take all, I'm going to shoot anybody that gets close to me market? Yes, it can.
So would you agree with me that in 2017 America, we would say global, the only way for a company to succeed is to be headed by a charismatic douchebag?
Yeah, I know where you're going with that. I mean, I can see that. But I don't absolutely believe that it's the case. Maybe big enterprises, sure, because they're very hard to wrestle, and maybe you need a wrestler for that. I don't know. Look, I will look at it from it's hard to say, it's hard to put open source, free market, libertarian in the same sentence, because I don't think that it's necessarily describing everything that's going on here. I think it's fair to say open source and capitalism in the same sentence. I think that does work because the way I look at it as a capitalist, I see that when any enterprise is to be created, you'll have an idea or a mission for what the enterprise is going to be doing. You'll have those that can do it, the geniuses, the technology people, the whatever. You'll have those that can fund it. They're financial people who can come in and they can provide the necessary capital in order for that enterprise to do its thing. Neither are evil, right? Let's remember, we think about the money people as being the guy with the monocle, that is the 1%er that we all want to occupy against. No, that's not the case. I mean, they're the ones that bring the capital to the table in order for the visionaries and for those that can do things to be able to do what they do best. I mean, a very, very good inventor, programmer is probably not motivated by money. I mean, sure, they like money, they want to drive the Ferrari, but really what they want to do is hack that thing, build that thing. And so if they're coming to it from an open source perspective, that they want to give away their code to the rest of the world, maybe that's okay. But if there's a money person who comes to the table and says, but I'm going to fund you so that you can devote all of your time to this thing, then that's a good thing too. If at the end of the day it produces something which the world can benefit from, everybody wins. And so is it free market? Is it open source? Who cares? It's just a meeting of the minds of people with different contributions to be able to offer something to each other. And maybe that is free market. I don't know. I like the idea of bringing the right people together who can work together as a team, who can produce something that's really, really cool, and ideally that it can be done so that the customer does still have choice and the customer is not locked into one thing, and that we don't we don't distort capitalism into this controlling dictatorial thing that it seems to have become a la Microsoft.
Just going to let it hang in the air there, see if anybody...
Yeah, there has to be corporate buy-in for open source to work. You know, you've got to have a vision, and if the vision is cast by the charismatic dictator, so be it. But I don't know if it has to be, but you have to have this, you know, I might not agree with this choice, but I love this thing, and so I'm sticking with this thing even though I don't like this choice. Now, you know, if the thing is the paycheck that this choice provides, okay, but so I mean, almost the thought behind your question, yes. Your question, I don't know. So, or I hope not. So.
Well, again, to go back to the email that started it all, he says, I'm looking for it anyway. Anyway, he goes on to say that that communism, socialism, capitalism, all the isms eventually break down as it scales. We have yet to find any system of governance. I'm going to stay away from the word government because people think world powers, but I'm looking at governance here as the way any group of people organizes itself. We haven't yet found one that scales, you know, to thousands or millions of people. So the only way a truly open project can persist is for it to stay small. And so, Miles, your example with the software, the database system that you got, it is a small cadre of people who are perfectly content to be a small cadre of people, and you're perfectly content for them to use to produce the product as it is. You don't need all the fancy marketing bells and whistles. There are other products, I'm sure, that on the market that have a stronger feature set and a slicker packaging and better documentation and better support. You don't need that because you just need the hammer, and they make really nice hammers. But when you scale, people aren't looking for just really nice hammers anymore. They want a complete tool set. They want documentation. They want insert slot A into tab B. Scratch that, reverse it. Insert tab A into slot B. Anyway, and I think scaling is the issue across all this discussion that we're having. If you want to stay small, you can be open. But if you want to get big, you have to be closed. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I'd agree. I would say, look, this does scale if the free market is allowed to be a free market, because then the customer has choices, and there's opportunities for everybody here in this whole pipeline.
Well, hold on, I want to interrupt you here. Okay, mm-hmm. The customer has choices. Inherent in the open source world, there are no customers, and there are very few choices.
The user.
The user, the consumer, the user.
Right, but also, I mean, the one thing open source doesn't really provide is choices. It provides versions of exact same thing, but it's not really choices.
Well, yeah. I mean, when I went through my experience, I had to review a number of different offerings, and so I did have choices, and I literally reviewed against what was platform compatible, what performed better, what scaled better, and I made a choice based on those sorts of things. So
But
I guess
to
as a
Seth's
consumer,
comment
I had choice.
about forking the code, that when you look at the Linux distributions in the world today, there are a lot of nameplates, but I would argue there aren't a lot of choices. You're picking, vanilla with chocolate sprinkles or vanilla with strawberry sprinkles. It's all vanilla. It's all ice cream. It's all the same thing. Nobody's selling custard. Nobody's selling pudding. Nobody's offering, donuts. It's all ice cream with different window dressing.
Well, that's because Haiku OS doesn't have the financial resources to develop, and GNU crap kernel, whatever that name is,
sometime in 2030, maybe.
Yeah, it's got another century of beta left, at least, before it gets to testing phase. So, open source, and there's nobody to work on it because there's no demand for it, because the amalgamation of these systems into the hybrids, has resulted in something that has far surpassed what the totally free open source thing can be. And I don't even know what we're talking about anymore.
No,
I'm getting a headache.
But no, okay. So there is a need. Okay, the different distros that are out there exist and succeed based on the amount of faith that their users have in them and their longevity. So Ubuntu has a lot of users because Canonical, as a larger enterprise, has been able to create something in which users had faith that it was going to be around tomorrow. Red Hat, the same thing. And then the versions that spin off, like CentOS or Scientific Linux or whatever, are all based on that faith model. But eventually there's too much forking, and it gets confusing, and you can't get grandma to use it because it just confuses them. And at some point, Mark, you're right, the open source world works really, really well as an OEM level supplier, but it requires somebody who wants to package something up for the masses to be able to turn it into something that's kind of people friendly. I mean, the iPhone, the iOS operating system is based on, the Mac OS X operating system is based on FreeBSD, but you couldn't get FreeBSD to run on grandma's, computer because it's just way too technical, right? They provided a solution to make that work. Did they give back to the FreeBSD project? They probably did because it was in their interest to keep the project running. So they probably ended up funding half of it. Therefore, it does work. But it's fair at the raw material level. Open source gives a lot of options to a lot of technical companies who can adapt it and turn it into a product. The adaptation and turning into a product is capitalism, free market, libertarian, etc. And as long as they don't abuse that right and try and dominate it and dictate everything to everybody else, the world will get along just famously, and the open source people will be very happy, be able to do what they do, and they can argue amongst themselves, and that's fine. They're all corralled. But they're not able to hit the end consumer market because they don't have the organizational infrastructure to do that, and the organizational infrastructures that are already in the Best Buys and already in the high street shops and whatever don't have the technical inventions that are coming out of open source. So we partner the two together and the world is a better place.
Well, I think, I can only speak to here in America because I'm American, but there's a fear of open source at the consumer street level. The word on the street is, that open source stuff, I'm going to stay away from that because I don't know if that's right, and I don't know where it came from, and what happens if there's a problem. I ain't got no 1-800 number to sit on for 2 hours and talk to some Indian guy who don't know how to speak English and don't know what's going on with my computer anyway. So, type in a forum, I'm too busy. And so I think the problem is the FUD created by the perverted capitalistic companies that we have left in this country have made a place that is antagonistic towards open source at the consumer level. How's that, Mark? Is that something you can go on?
You guys both make excellent points. That and Miles, you said what I was trying to say better than I was. That open source, that openness works really well for foundational infrastructure, but it's not good for making a package. Not for putting something in shrink wrap. Ubuntu has the best shot at doing that, and they have failed time and time again. Even with Shuttleworth's millions to throw at it, it just hasn't worked. They haven't been able to do it because the entire ethos, the basic foundation in the DNA of the people who do it is not it's not there. It's not. There's no Steve Jobs there. There just isn't. Steve Wozniak would be happy to make a few components at a time and make $50,000 a year for the rest of his life. He would have been happy as an engineer doing that. We needed a Steve Jobs to give us Apple. And Seth, you make a great point that in the end user land, one of the problems is we've been fed this lie that you have to have that there's safety in conformity. That if you're like everybody else, you won't have any problems. Well, that's kind of ridiculous. WannaCry and things like that have shown us that if you're like everybody else, you're crazy vulnerable. And I can't count the number of people I've had say, well, where's the 800 number? Who's going to support it? And my answer to that has always been, how happy are you with the support you've got now? You're not. Your support is always a guy who you call, a contractor. Or somebody you hire to do it. And that doesn't change if it's open source. You just maybe change the number you dial.
Yeah, but and the reason that breaks down is because if there is a problem and the CEO goes to the CIO or CTO and says, why is this working? If he says, I've got my department working on producing a patch, how come that's not here? You need to get it out. We need to have this installed yesterday. Sir, I've been on the phone with Microsoft for the past week. Okay, I understand. Just as soon as you can get it done, let me know.
Yes.
So, I mean,
you're so right.
Somebody tell me I'm wrong.
Well, okay, let's talk politics now. This is solved with a true free market libertarian model by having competitors competing for the quality of service to the end customer. So if you don't like the customer service you're getting from company XYZ, go to company ABC and let's see if they can do it. Let's see what it costs. Let's see who can do a better job at it. May the best company win.
Yeah,
I wish we had that.
when you go down to that root level, when you're talking about developers of databases who are working in their spare time and who aren't being paid to do it, the first amount of friction they get from another human, they shut down. They will plow through for weeks on friction from the application, from the hardware, from the product that they're passionate about. But at the moment there's friction from a human, they just shut down. I don't have to mess with this. I'm a volunteer. I don't need to deal with this.
Oh, well, I'm not saying the open source people need to be manning the customer service desk. I'm thinking that the company which is packaging their product to the masses, they do that. Yeah. But what I am saying is that they cannot dominate the marketplace in this kind of Stalin-esque model because that is not free market capitalism. That's just greed and dictatorial power. And it's a human flaw and we need to manage it.
Yeah, but what you're saying there is, while yes, it's true on the surface, but there's collisions of that we see all the time, like the entire Intel driver issue in Linux. Intel doesn't want to release enough information for the open source guys to write a driver because proprietary, because they're afraid the open source guys are going to suddenly start making hardware. It's a ridiculous assertion. But it's one that's been going on for 2 decades. And hold on, Seth. Hold on. Let me finish.
Okay.
So they don't want to make that enough information available for the Linux guys to write a driver. Sometimes they're willing to go out and write a driver themselves. And Intel has done this. We will write a driver ourselves for Linux because we recognize we need to do this. But we're going to obfuscate it, and we're going to give it to you as what's called a binary blob that you're going to wrap into the kernel. Then the free people say, oh, no, we can't have anything in there that's not open. We reject your willingness to help us because you're not willing to help us in the way that we want you to help us. And so that's the kind of conflict that we see between the open and the closed. Now, Seth.
I was going to say that if they write a driver that explains all of the stuff, then they're giving away their proprietary technology to their rivals. The end users aren't going to do it, but their chief competitor, who is it now, AMD, they're going to reverse engineer it and be able to lap up not all their trade secrets, but close the competitive gap, and Intel will have done R&D for AMD. And I understand the problem with that, you know. At least that would be a point they would say.
Personally, I don't believe that's true. I think that anybody who's reverse engineering wouldn't go to software to do it anyway. But beside the point, I get that, and so what you have here is a right-thinking company. I want to help. I want my hardware to work on your software. I want to give you drivers. I have employed a software developer to write a driver for you, but I'm not going to let you look at the code. And then that's where the principles come in, on the open source principles, and they say, well, if it's not open, we can't use it. And so we have this thing now where once I install a Linux distro on my laptop, I now have to go to an Intel website and download a third-party binary blob because the Linux kernel won't put it in there. Everybody would benefit. Everybody would benefit, full stop, from this merging, for putting this binary blob in the kernel. But ideology stops the benefit. And that's what happens time and time again. Richard
Stallman wouldn't benefit.
Yes, he would, because a lot of the stuff he uses runs on Linux, whether he's directly using it or not. The only reason Richard Stallman can get away with the life he lives is he has a support group of people who don't think like he does.
I was just trying to egg it on.
You just got me when I was already going. But I think I've been dancing around this in my head this whole time. This is where these ideologies collide. When openness and closedness collide, and the both people have a point, but the problem is everybody in the world suffers because both people are sticking to their point.
Microsoft doesn't suffer; they sell more Windows.
I'll tell you what, though, if you imagine the world before open source, and you can imagine that open source never came about, let's say Stallman wasn't born or whatever, and there was no such thing as open source, we would not have advanced anywhere near as fast or as far as we had in such a period of time. I would throw that out. I don't believe that we could have leveraged technology without open source at the pace that we did. And I think at the end of the day, we have to respect it for what it's given us. And I think it's an onus upon any corporation who has benefited to the trillions or the billions of dollars, as companies like Intel have, to be able to give something back. And if that means that they are not willing to lose their power position in their marketplace, we as consumers have to recognize that, and we have to say, well, maybe ARM ain't such a bad company to go with after all. Maybe AMD's a good choice. Maybe we need to start to get a little more savvy ourselves and recognize that power for power's sake isn't actually in our best interest.
Well, you've really described a Kobayashi Maru there for Intel. If we develop an open kernel, we lose our leader position. If we don't develop a Linux kernel, an open kernel, we lose our leader position. How is that good for Intel?
It's not, but really, do we care? I mean, Intel's a name on a chip that we happen to use. If it was something else with a different name and we can still do what we need to do we care?
Well,
I mean, I think we give them far more credit than they deserve, to be honest.
Following on your statement that we wouldn't be where we are today without open source, we wouldn't be where we are today without Intel's early development. Maybe they're stagnant today, but we owe them a lot, historically speaking. And, of course, they've made a boatload of money in the process.
Well, I think his point is if the consumer rejected purchasing Intel and made a concerted effort to, hey, AMD produces the driver for their software readily available. It's in the kernel, it's open. And so we're going to use that. Then Intel would no longer be the market leader in that segment, forcing them to react and open up their stuff. And then the end result would be better for everyone. Long term, it would be better for everyone. Short term, it would be worse for Intel. But because they weren't the leader, they would be forced to react to the leader, in that case, AMD. But we know that's not going to happen because everybody wants the Intel inside. And if I could get away with it, I would bust out Weird Al's It's All About the Pentiums right now, because it still is all about the Pentiums, baby.
Well, I mean, what you just said there, Seth, is we have to trust the masses to make the right choices.
I know it'll never happen.
We've known since roughly 100 AD that you give the masses bread and circuses and you get what you want. Intel is really good at bread and circuses. Open source is not.
Yep.
Well, okay, well, let's call it for what it is. Intel's dominance in the market would not have happened if it wasn't for collusion with Microsoft and creating a cartel position around the OEM manufacturers in the 90s that gave them dominance. If they were not allowed to do that by whatever legal means they probably wouldn't be the billions and billions of dollar corporation they are today. And maybe we wouldn't even have this conversation because somebody else would have popped up to take away part of their market. They didn't get here by creating better chips. I mean, they got good chips, but they didn't get to where they were by creating better chips. There were RISC chips out there at the time, and IBM had stuff, and PowerPC were out there, and all these. And these guys didn't get even into the room to demonstrate their product because Microsoft and Intel would not let OEM manufacturers buy anything but their combination. And I don't know, that's a conspiracy that I think is well documented. And it demonstrates that an abuse of the free market by those that aren't necessarily on the open source side of the fence, but on the capitalism side of the fence, is as bad and needs to be called out. And unfortunately, they weren't.
No, I totally agree. And again, it comes back to the end user not caring. If the end user cared, it would be, unicorns and fairy dust for everyone. That's the second time I've used that phrase today. But the end user doesn't care. The end user wants this thing to be 10 cents cheaper than it was last week, and they'll want it to be 10 cents cheaper next week. Well, that's not going to happen if I can't maximize my production in economies of scale. If I, it costs X amount and that goes down the more stuff you make. But if you're not making enough because you have these 10 different companies making it, that means you have 10 different CEOs with 10 different CEO packages draining money from the research and investment and the production lines and the engineers that make it all go. So you need to whittle that down to just enough to avoid antitrust and then still dominate the field. And so that way there's only 2 or 3 CEO packages and only one of those is of anything. So, unfortunately, I don't care because, back then it was the Dancing Baby. Everybody remember the Dancing Baby video? One of the great things. Z Thing before there was YouTube. You had to get online and see stuff like that. You didn't care about the stuff that went behind it. You just wanted that shiny computer that you could cuss at because it didn't do things the way you wanted it to do. But you were happy because you had a computer with 2 more MHZs, whatever that was, than your neighbor bought yesterday.
Well, let's take it out of the hands of the masses a little bit and let's personalize this. Let's take some ownership. As long as the 3 of us start every purchase search with sort by price, low to high, we're part of the problem. And I know I do. I always, that's my default thing. When you go to a website, say Amazon or eBay or any of those, the first thing they give you is either featured or most relevant, right? I always change that. First thing I do, price low to high. As long as we, the masses, we, the individuals, As long as price is our primary concern, all of these other things are academic. Openness is academic. Capitalism is academic. Corruption is academic. We are getting what we deserve as we continually drive price down and quality down in search of price. And the little guy is being squeezed out because I'm not willing to pay $2.97. I literally just yesterday bought something that was $2.96 over something that was $2.97, just because it was a penny cheaper. I'm the problem here.
Yeah, wow. This is a big issue because history is repeating as it does. I mean, any time that we succumb to not necessarily doing our proper due diligence and research and whatever, we get what we've got. And what was running through my mind as you were talking about that whole thing was, what does the future look like? It's easy for us to look back 10 or 20 years about how we got here, how open source differs from proprietary, and how the capitalism and all that sort of thing works. What I'm curious about is where it goes from here, because if you look at all the dominant products coming up on the radar, you're seeing companies like Facebook, YouTube, Tesla, Netflix. These are high market cap corporations that are coming into the space. And what I'm worried is that none of them are doing anything in terms of giving back their technology to the open source market. I mean, imagine 3-4 years from now, after the Tesla Model 3 has come out, and all of a sudden they've already sold, 500,000 pre-orders on that thing? That company has a higher market cap than Ford. So if you look out there on the street and you see 3 out of 5 cars are Teslas, what happens if you want to take it to a service center or get it modified or change this or open source that or whatever? This company was built on using and leveraging open source to get it to where it is, but they're not going to be any different to Intel. They're not going to give up what they've got. They're not going to let you see what goes on inside of it because, I don't know, someone might hack their car. No, it's not. It's because they don't want to give it up. And so we're going to repeat this process ongoing all the time. And unfortunately, I think 3 or 4 or 5 years from now, the people who will be the most evil, corporate barons out there are probably people we today call heroes, like Elon Musk, Zuckerberg, those sort of people who went out and they, took a risk and they forged their way through. And, no, at the end of the day, 5 years from now, they're all going to be Hitler. Yeah, I went there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who had 122 in the pool? You win. 1 hour, 22 minutes.
Yeah. And, and the problem is we don't look at our, Mark, building on what you said, we don't look at our ability, our process that sort low to high, and I'm only going to spend 300, 301, forget it. Whenever I do it, that's just me being rational, sane, trying to be a good steward of my finances. I can cloak it in Christianese. I can cloak it in American pay. You name the thing. I'm in a church, so I'm doing Christianese. I'm being a good steward of the finances God has given me, so I'm not wasting the extra money. But when other people out there do it, they're wrong and controlled masses. And unfortunately, that's the mindset that everybody uses to justify their decision. And before I cut out, I see we're coming up quick on my 8 o'clock cutout moment. I just want to say, to counter everything that Miles just said, I can negate his whole argument. All I have to ask is, are you a child-hating communist? And that makes his argument null and void, because we're talking here about, it's not about security like the companies claim. It's about freedom. It's about individual choice. It's about the collective doing what is best for the collective, and not the individual doing what looks best for the individual but is actually best for the corporation. So that is unfortunately the minefield. We didn't just stumble in. We're like halfway in, and it's dangerous any way we go.
Right.
We're right smack in the middle. Turn around and go back is bad. Go forward is bad. Left is bad. Right is bad. But we can't stay here. So.
Yeah, and this leads me back to the mantra I stumbled onto for 2017, and that's pay for what you like. Everything we've talked about has come back to, if you want freedom, if you want libertarianism, if you want things to openness, if you all want these things to continue, you have to be a capitalist. You have to pay, and pay for what you like. Stop sorting by price. Mark Cockrell, stop sorting by price. You're the problem. I'm not preaching at you, people. I'm only talking to myself. This is a discussion of one. Stop doing that. Start looking at what the product is and who makes it, and invest some time and effort in it. Because if you're not willing to invest any effort in what you purchase, even if it's soap or shampoo or the toilet paper, whatever you're doing, if you're not willing to invest any time or effort in it, there's no reason for anybody producing the product to invest any time or effort in it either. And then you end up living in a disposable world with cheap crap, and you get what you paid for. So pay for what you like, or you get what you pay for.
Let me add one thing to that too. I mean, the open source model is quite successful because it's I guess what we would call a decentralized network model. People work on projects from their bedrooms all over the world because of the internet, and because the internet allows them all to connect together and work. They can leverage off their ingenuity as a team better than having to all go to the same HQ and head office or whatever for that. So there's something to be really said for the decentralized model. And I think that at the end of the day in history, decentralized work like that always wins. It's the reason why the Spanish never conquered the southern parts of America, or at least not in Arizona, because they could not put together an army that could defeat a networked model of tribal Native Americans who could fight them off because they weren't all in one spot. And ultimately, if we're going to succeed or fail based on how the corporation acts as a good steward of all of this, which we know historically they won't, when they eventually do fail, what will be left will be the decentralized model of the open source. And in some ways, I think that is more closely paralleled to a true free market libertarian model than it is to a central governance model in other forms. So that's kind of where I mean, there's a lot of big words here. I'm just saying that open source is one because it's decentralized development. Everybody gets to play. They might not all agree with each other. They might yell and scream at each other. But the fact that they can work decentralized means they can't be killed off. Whereas the corporation's central, and it can lose. We've seen this happen. And when it does, it takes down all your investment in their product. So I like open source. I do. But I don't believe that it's able to put together a product to go mass market.
And I want to kind of, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
You waded through it nicely.
Okay. One thing I want to add, and Miles's friend who talked about, solar batteries and all that kind of stuff, we look at the end user, oh, look, I bought this, it's green, therefore I help save the world. Well, okay, maybe the last mile is green, but does what happened in the first 9 to get to you, does the extra costs associated there make up for what you did? You want to do what's best for yourself and your core little group. And one thing the internet has taught us is that our core little group is much bigger. Individual decisions can affect, planetary, commerce networks. So just because you're saving a penny by, or you're saving money by buying this product, what went into making that product? Nobody was exploited in America because we have tough labor laws, but what about other countries? So looking at it that way, we need to be more rational, more intelligent, more thoughtful, more discerning consumers in whatever field, whether, we are consuming food at the grocery store or cars that we're buying or computers or the websites we visit or whatever. We should be more discerning And that would go a long way to, hey, that might be cheaper, but they kill that person's parents if they don't meet their production quota. Well, I don't want to buy from there. So,
dang it, Seth, you had to go back to personal responsibility. I mean, I don't want to care about the citizens of Panama. I just want to eat my Dole bananas. Google it. I don't want to care about human rights in China. I just want my cheap phones. Why am I responsible for what big companies do to other people? Because I'm funding the big companies.
Yeah. And you're funding. I mean, you can look at it. Hey, well, because they now have jobs, their wages are going to come up over time, blah, blah, blah. Well, hey, if we said we're not buying any more unless you change that, the people on top don't want to go back to nothing. So they're going to change. But again, doesn't matter, because I know if I switch to Verizon, I get a free shiny iPhone every 2 years.
So information is power.
No, information is ammunition. You can still shoot yourself in the foot.
Responsibility is power.
Yeah.
All right, David, was that a good enough discussion for you? I think so. Good. Thank you for sending that in, and listeners like you should do that sort of stuff, because honestly, we're tired of coming up with topics. 297 episodes in, we were done at like 87. We've just been winging it ever since. So we need you to give us things to talk about. Thank you, David, for doing that. The rest of you can do that by going to elementop.com. Element as in the period table of elements, OP as in OP Taylor. And click the Contact Us button at the top of the page. Fill out the form there, as did David, and let us know what you think. Or you can send an email to, as Seth alluded to earlier, geekrant@elementop.com, and that will go to all of us. Or you can, if you want your voice to be right alongside ours, you can dial 559-I-AM-OP and listen to and record that your message, and we'll listen to it and play it over the air. Seth, what happened this week in history?
All right, Mark. So on August the 5th, 1858, the first successful transatlantic telegraph cable was sent. After 4 failed attempts, American merchant Cyrus Westfield succeeds in completing the first successful transatlantic telegraph cable. Completed approximately 2 months after construction began, the cable is only operational for just over a month. However, this cable proved the feasibility of transatlantic communications, and Cyrus Westfield raised new funds to complete the first permanent telegraph line in 1866, 8 years later. And that happened this week in history, Mark. And now, back to you.
I think you've done this one before, or we've talked about something similar.
Yeah, we've talked about like the round the world and the first continental one, but I looked and this one didn't show up in my this week in history. I have a search, so blame the Googles.
It's amazing to think that roughly 4,000 miles between coasts. Somebody check that for me. That there's actually wires. Continents are wired up. That's kind of amazing to me. I can't run a wire between my bedroom and my basement because I run into obstacles. But these people wired up continents in 1858, not 1958, 1858. Somebody actually took 2 pieces of copper and stretched them from one continent to another. That's dreaming big. Cool stuff.
Yep.
Very cool.
Oh, and I think this came up in our history of communications episode that we did.
Quite possible. I read an article just this week. I was looking at vacation spots, and I was looking at the Outer Banks of North Carolina because it's relatively close to us. And an article came up about these 3 islands in the Outer Banks outside of North Carolina, where the power line that feeds these 3 islands got cut in a construction accident. And in height of tourist season, these islands that only exist for tourism, otherwise they wouldn't be there, have no power. And one of the residents said it's like a hurricane without the storm. Nobody's here. There's no power. Our food's all going bad. That sort of stuff. But when you think about that, a cable laid across the ocean floor seems pretty safe, right? But even that could get caught. I wonder how many transatlantic cables have been damaged and had to be replaced. I'm sure that's happened. Has to have.
Yep.
I think that's the theme of Sharknado 7.
Oh, I think it's tonight Sharknado 5, or is it next Sunday?
Oh gosh.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe we've gone this long without us talking about Sharknado 5. I have 4 let me down, but again, 3 is maybe the greatest cheese movie ever made. So Sharknado 5, if it hasn't struck yet, is about to strike soon. We should all get ready, and we should all be so lucky.
Well, they've been doing lots of Sharknado this weekend, so maybe it is this weekend, and they're doing the run up to it. Let's see, Sharknado 5 on TV today at 10 p.m.
Woohoo!
So, yeah, there it is. I read an article. I didn't read the article. I read the headline. It was one of those clickbait things on YouTube, and it was like, scientist says Sharknado could, quote, totally happen. That,
there was a movie, so he's not wrong.
Oh, all right. So now, Seth, what do you have to lower my productivity that's making you seem like a better hiring option?
Okay, well, you had so much fun with Fill the Oceans. This is
I'm still going 86 days in. I'm still trying to fill that dang ocean.
This is Tube Clicker. This will teach you all about how to be a successful YouTuber and become famous and make lots of money. The bad thing about this one is if you close out that tab, it comes back and you have to start over. So it doesn't remember what you were doing. But you basically have this mock YouTube set up, and you've got to click to generate views and income so that you can get this auto clicking function, and then you can have enough money to buy ads, which funnels more traffic to your site so you can upload new videos. And it's just a time killer. Nothing special about it. But anyway, it's my show closing semi-spectacular this week.
Okay.
Click, 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 click.
All about the clicks.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
The end game of this Fill the Oceans thing is just crazy. I just can't get that last few percent. Anyway, it's become a thorn in my side, as Paul would say. So this has been a wide-ranging discussion about a number of things, but in the end, it came down to 2 of my favorite things. Take personal responsibility and pay for what you like. So there you go. That's the answer to your question, David. Take personal responsibility and pay for what you like. Thanks for hanging out with us, and we'll see you next week. Seth Miles, as always, I literally couldn't do the show without you. I could, but it would be a different show. It'd be called the Sound and Fury show that I did a couple of episodes of. And it would just be me ranting. And if you want some of those, there's about 3 episodes of that. And then I got tired of it, frankly. So thank you anyway for doing that. Listener out there, I'm just going to flat out beg for money. Go to patreon.com/elementop. Give me money so that I can pay these guys for the great work that they do. We just closed July. It's early August. I just closed July. Of course, I don't have my Amazon fund referral things in for July, but I got a payment in July, at the end of July, for, I think, May. My total grand proceeds from Patreon and from Amazon and from donations and everything was $87 this month. I'm not getting rich off of this, people. And I'd really love to be able to throw these guys some money. And I can't do that unless you throw me some money. elementop.com/Patreon. Make that happen. Please. Pseudo. Go and do it. That's it. Thanks for hanging out with us, everybody. And we'll see you next week, because that's it for this episode of The GeekRant.
Remember, the answer to everything else is 42.
Ciao.
But the question is, what's 6 times 9? Or was it 6 times 8? 6 times 8, I think. Yeah. All right. Stopping the stream.